Hello and welcome to Pockenrop. On this video I am continuing my series of top 15s from each decade. The very first video I did was the 1980s. This video is going to be from the 2000s. So it's going to incorporate the albums from the beginning of January 2000 all the way through to December 2009. As before, in terms of ranking my choices, I use a website called PubMeeple. There will be a link to that in the description below, so you can go and rank your own stuff, whether that be music, games, beers, whatever you want to rank. The website's absolutely fantastic, and the ranking engine is a great little tool. But without further ado, let's dive straight in to the number 15 on my list, and I have chosen U2, All That You Can't Leave Behind. So U2 kind of lost their way at the end of the 90s with the pop album. It's not a great listen. There's a good track or two on it, but they came back in force as the U2 we kind of got to know through the 80s into the early 90s with this album. It's got some absolutely cracking tracks on it, like Beautiful Day. There's Stuck in a Moment You Can't Get Out Of, which is about Michael Hutchence. There's Elevation, and there's a few great album tracks as you go through, things like Grace and Peace on Earth. It's a really good album. It's my number 15. At number 14, I've got an album that is mainly covers. Now, if you've watched any other videos of mine, you'll know that I'm not a great fan of covers albums, generally speaking. I like to hear original material. But I'll make an exception for this particularly excellent album from 2000, and that is American 3 by Johnny Cash. Now, I'm very fond of Johnny Cash anyway. I think his vocals are wonderful. But on this album here, the selection of songs I think is probably the best of all of the American recordings that he did with Rick Rubin. So it kicks off with a cover of Won't Back Down by Tom Petty. You've got Solitary Man. There's a couple of standards like Lucky Old Sun or Wayfaring Stranger. And then you've got One by U2 from the Acting Baby album. And then right in the middle of the album, I think, is where the heart of it lies. And it's a dark, dark song called Mercy Seat. Now, I don't know the original. It was by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. But man, is it a tough listen. But it's delivered brilliantly. It's about a man in the electric chair being executed for a crime that he did or didn't commit. It's never entirely sure from the song, but it's a powerful song. So that's my number 14, American 3 by Johnny Cash. At number 13, I've placed an album that I think is the best from this band. It's the most consistent album they released. There's no filler tracks as there are with some of their early ones, and I've gone with Gaze by the Beautiful South. Now, it's criminally overlooked even amongst Beautiful South fans, but the quality of the songwriting on this is, to my mind, the best that Heaton and Rotheray ever did. You've got Just a Few Things That I Ain't, which is almost a frenetic lyric, borderlines into rap in some cases. It's that quickly delivered. Let Go With The Flow, a kind of flop single, but it's really well performed. The melody and words on this are perfectly married, and I really don't think that they ever bettered this. There's no questionable tracks like they often had on, say, Choke, where you've got I Hate You But You're Interesting, or I Love You But You're Boring on their first album, Welcome To. This is, for me, easily the Beautiful South's most listenable, accessible, and overall best album. So it was released in 2003 to very little fanfare, but they did have a brand new vocalist on here. So Jackie Abbott had to leave the band. She now works with Paul Heaton again, and they recruited Alison Wheeler, and that there's a freshness as a result of a new female vocalist that is not really there on any other Beautiful South album. So I love Gaze, and I really recommend it. It's my number 13. At number 12, I put an album that the vast majority of people watching this won't have heard of, by an artist they won't have heard of. That's because it's a worship album. So lots of things happened for me in the noughties decade. I started it as a 25-year-old single man. I finished it as a 35-year-old happily married man with 2 kids. And in the interim, my musical tastes drastically changed. I stopped listening to regular rock and pop albums as much as I used to. I started listening to a lot more Christian worship and Christian music albums. And this is reflected by the fact that at number 12, I've placed Arriving by Chris Tomlin. This is probably my favourite worship album of all time. The quality of songwriting on this is at its very best. Coupled with the fact that it contains what I think is possibly the greatest worship song written of the last 20 years, How Great Is Our God, that it's an easy listen. I'm not saying it's easy listening, but it's a very easy listen. There are many songs on here that I have sung in church or I've personally led worship in church. And so it holds a special place as a result. It's not an album that I think would be for everybody, naturally, because it's a Christian worship album, but it is a good one. So that's my number 12, Chris Tomlin's Arriving. At number 11, I have placed Black Holes and Revelations by Muse. Now, I first heard this in someone's car when I went out for a drive with them after they'd just had their first child while we were waiting for our first child to make his appearance. So I've got a little bit of linkage in that. And I remember hearing it thinking, I quite like this. What is it? And he said, oh, it's Muse, Black Holes and Revelations. I subsequently bought the album afterwards, didn't listen to it for ages, again, picked it up a couple of years later and realised what a great album this is. This has got hit after hit on it, really. It's bombastic, ridiculous and silly in the best way that Muse always are. It feels like it's the greatest Queen album that Queen didn't record. You've got Starlight on here, which is a superb pop single. And then right in the middle, there's the track Invincible, which is just a really well-delivered ballad. And even in that, in the instrumental break, you've got a little bit of Muse madness. It concludes with Knights of Sidonia, which kind of feels of a piece with the last 3 tracks that kind of reflect the back cover and a bit of a Western style to it. I don't think it classes as a concept album exactly. Muse are by no means shy of doing concept albums, but this is just a really good pop rock album. And if you've not heard Black Holes and Revelations, or if you've not heard Muse, this is a really good start and entry point into them. My number 11, Black Holes and Revelations by Muse. Moving into my top 10 now, I have placed an album that I bought probably when it came out, disliked, sold on, and have since revisited the artist and discovered a lot more of their solo work and the brilliance that lies in it. And that is Brainwashed by George Harrison. So this is Harrison's final album. He spent over a decade recording parts of this album. The anthology with the Beatles kind of got in the way and maybe derailed. He was also almost murdered in an attack at his home, coupled with the fact that he then developed inoperable brain cancer. So there's a melancholy to this album in the fact that it is his last. He knew he was dying when he was completing it. But there's a joy and a delight in this album and a lack of preachiness by and large that lifts this to probably his best album since All Things Must Pass. It was completed by his good friend Jeff Lynne and his son Dhani Harrison, who used, apparently according to Wiki, the same recording sessions that George himself had booked with the expectation of finishing the album. So he had every intention of this coming out when it did. It's just he didn't see it. But Brainwashed is a really good George Harrison album. I want this on vinyl, so I'm going to keep an eye out. My number 10, Brainwashed by George Harrison. At number 9, I've placed another album and artist that the vast majority of people watching this won't have heard of, and that is Revelations by Third Day. They're a Christian rock band, or at least they were. And this album came out in 2009. It's packed with really, really good songs. There's several tracks on here that I run to. Things like Take It All and the title track Revelation. It's a really good album. If you're interested at all in sampling Christian rock albums, this is a good place to go. Third Day are an amazingly good band. One of my very favourites, and it won't be the last time that they appear in one of these videos. I can guarantee it. I'm so sad they no longer exist, and that they split up a couple of years ago, because they were by far my favourite Christian band of recent years. Third Day, Revelations at number 9. At number 8, I have placed 21st Century Breakdown by Green Day. So I kind of started to appreciate Green Day's particular music towards the kind of start of the 2010s. So this is actually quite a recent addition to my collection, really. I didn't get into this until at least 5 years after it came out, and even then I thought, because I only got into it because of American Idiot. But this album is so good. So this is 2009. There are so many tracks on it. It's easily a double album in all truth. It's set across 3 acts. It's a little bit overblown. I do get the criticisms of that. But the songwriting of Billy Joe Armstrong on here, I think, is probably some of his best. You've got the outstanding 21 Guns. There is Last of the American Girls, which was about his wife. There's Know Your Enemy, the title track 21st Century Breakdown, Before the Lobotomy. Many of these songs are taken off this album and are included in the American Idiot stage show, the Broadway show, which I saw a couple of years ago at the Birmingham Alex, and was fantastic. The songs are really, really robust. So 21st Century Breakdown is my number 8. At number 7 is an album that has actually waned a little bit for me in recent months. It would have been a top 5er probably 6 months ago. And that is My Chemical Romance, The Black Parade. So I have a podcast with my son called Generation Mix. Please do go and check it out. Link in the description below. And the premise of that podcast is I make compilation CDs of artists for my son, and we've been reviewing those. We started it 4 years ago, the compilations. We've only been doing the podcast with the hindsight of those 4 years. But as bonus episodes, we've been looking at full albums that one of us cherishes in some way, or that the other one really, really wants to hear, but wouldn't merit their own compilation CD. And this was the first bonus we did. He was desperate to hear it, and whilst he liked an awful lot of it, it did throw up with me listening to it as well that there's several tracks on here that I don't love as much as maybe Welcome to the Black Parade or Teenagers or even the track Cancer. And it is a concept album about someone dying from cancer. So it's a dark subject matter, it's a dark album, but it is a very good album. It's just slipped a little bit. I still think it's top notch, and I've got a friend who it's their favourite album of all time. If you like rock and you don't mind a bit of emo, then why not try My Chemical Romance, The Black Parade. My number 7. Now, if you watch my 1980s video, then you'll know I'm not averse to some good pop. And you might have noticed so far that it's been fairly pop-free until now. At number 6, Foot of the Mountain by a-ha. I love a-ha, Norway's finest export. And At the Foot of the Mountain, I think, is quite possibly their greatest work. This was intended to be the end of a-ha. They had planned to split after this album. They did some final concerts and called it a day. As we may now know, they did go on much later to produce another album, but this 2009 album, Foot of the Mountain, it contains Riding the Crest, which is a great song, Foot of the Mountain, the title track, Shadow Side, gosh, that's brilliant. Mother Nature Goes to Heaven, Start the Simulator, and that's just 5 of the 10 tracks on here. All 5 of those tracks are absolute peaches. If you like pop, if you like a-ha, and you've never heard Foot of the Mountain, you need to hear it. It's a great album. Proper a-ha. It takes you straight back to the quality that they did in the 80s of things like Hunting High and Low and Scoundrel Days. It's a superb album. My number 6. So before we dive into the top 5, it's customary on these videos for me to talk about some of the things that didn't make it in. So you'll be seeing on your screen now a few montages of some of the albums that didn't make. You'll be spotting things like Origin of Symmetry by Muse and also The Resistance by Muse. You'll see there's Mika. That's such a good album, actually. Mika's Life in Cartoon Motion. Very nearly made it in. As did 12 Stops and Home by The Feeling. I mean, that is pure pop, and it's really entertaining and very enjoyable to listen to. However, I can say that this decade was a really hard one for me to pick my favourite 15 from. Not because there was such an embarrassment of riches, but more to the point, my musical tastes went through that shift, and my personal circumstances went through that shift, and I kind of entered my 30s, and around about that time they reckon you stop listening to quite so much new music. So it was a hard list to compile. That said, there are still some great stuff and many albums that I love. At number 5, I've got the only thing in this list that I own on vinyl, although you can see I have got some 2010 vinyl, and that is Chaos and Creation in the Backyard by Paul McCartney. Produced by Nigel Godrich, who did most of his work with Radiohead. And what a good producer for Paul Nigel Godrich was. Paul needs, I think, somebody to say to him, that's not good enough, have another go. Now put that aside, ditch that, write something better. And that's what Godrich did. He said, those songs that you bring to me, they weren't good enough, do something else. And Paul did. And he's produced, I think, with this album, his most consistently good album since Band on the Run. That's not to say that I think it is his best album since Band on the Run, but it was his most consistent album throughout. There is no bad track listed on this album. You'll notice I said the word listed. There is a hidden track called I've Only Got Two Hands, which is rubbish. But listed on here, every single track I think is fantastic. Even English Tea, which gets a lot of stick from both McCartney and non-McCartney fans, is a really good song. There's a beautiful tribute on here to George in the song called Friends to Go. It's such a George Harrison song style. It could have been on Brainwashed. And his last real chart relevance on here with Fine Line and Jenny Wren, the sequel almost to Blackbird. This isn't just a great late period McCartney album. It's a great McCartney album. My number 5, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. Number 4 is an album that I have only recently rediscovered. Now, I knew I liked it. I've always liked it, but I put it on the back burner. And I listened to a podcast called McCartney and Goal, and what they do is they take a album and they put it through a World Cup style knockout. And they did this for this album, and they spoke about this album with a level of reverence that hadn't been present in any of their other podcasts. And it's Back to Black by Amy Winehouse. This made me go back and listen to the album and realise what I'd been not missing, but almost dismissing for a while. This is a phenomenally good album. Even to the point where if I do this video in year or two's time, I think this could rise higher. There's no bad track on it. We've got at least half a dozen genuine classic songs like Rehab, You Know I'm No Good, Back to Black, Love is a Losing Game, Tears Dry on Their Own. I mean, if you've never heard Back to Black, then you are missing out. This album is absolutely wonderful, and her singing is fantastic. This paved the way for the success of Adele. Let's be honest, and even Adele admits that. What she could have gone on and accomplished, we will never know, because sadly she had this addictive personality and self-destructive streak. And that's where I think the reverence came from in their episode, is that you just know she could have done so much more, so much great stuff that was potentially there, and it's sad to think what happened to her. Back to Black, Amy Winehouse, my number 4. At number 3, I have placed something that could be described as a protest album. And the protest is towards the Iraq War and President George W. Bush. We're back with Green Day, and it is American Idiot. This album is perfect. There is nothing I would ditch. There is nothing that I would replace it with on the track listing. You've got 2 massive long song suites of called Jesus of Suburbia and Homecoming. You've got the opening track, American Idiot, full of all its swearing. And then you've got the other great singles off here, Holiday and Boulevard of Broken Dreams. And then the song that really hooked me into this album, Wake Me Up When September Ends. One of my top 20 songs of all time. I've gigged that song and I've loved every second when I have. I adore American Idiot. I like the stage show, and this is another one that I'm going to get this on vinyl one day. I guarantee it. And I want to see Green Day if they ever come around live again. If we're ever allowed to go out the house and go to live music, I want to go to Green Day. Great album. My number 3, American Idiot. At number 2, I said previously everybody needs something a little bit bonkers in their life, and no more bonkers than Muse. This is Absolution, their 2003 album. Packed with hits, because they really did milk it, and it's probably the album that really got me into Muse. I've owned it for a while, I never listened to it, and then I put it on and I thought, where's this been all my life? And I said the same again when I listened to it the next time and the next time, and it gets better each time. Heart of the album for me is Butterflies and Hurricanes, because that's what hooked me in. When I heard that on my headphones, when I was out walking one day, I went like, this is absolutely insane. Who marries Rachmaninoff with some mental pop rock? Well, Matt Bellamy from Muse does. And that's only part of the album. You've got Hysteria on here, which is an absolutely cracking riff on it. You've got Stockholm Syndrome, Sing for Absolution, Thoughts of a Dying Atheist. It's a superb album. Muse Absolution is my number 2. So, after all of that, what could I possibly put at number 1? My number 1 album is an album that, if you've never heard it before, I envy you. Because I want to go back to the point at which I didn't know this album, so I could hear it again for the first time and be blown away. And it is Hopes and Fears by Keane, their debut. This album is, as are the last 3 or 4 that I talked about, is perfect. There's nothing I would replace on this album with anything else. I love this album so much that I found the follow-up, Under the Iron Sea, a huge letdown and disappointment. So this has got Somewhere Only We Know, which you probably know from not only being a single for Keane, but also a number 1 single for Lily Allen when it was used on an advert for John Lewis. Got Bend and Break, you've got Everybody's Changing, which again I've gigged that. Fantastic song. It's unbreakable as a song. She Has No Time, Can't Stop Now, Untitled, and then it concludes with Bed Shaped. I really do wish that I could wipe my memory of this album so I could hear it again for the first time, because it's that good. I adore this album. It's in my top 10 of all time. It's the only one of everything that we've gone through on this run through that is in my top 10 albums of all time. Hopes and Fears by Cant. It's perfect. So that concludes my run through of my top 15 of albums from the noughties. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please, what have I missing? You've heard what my tastes are like from that decade. What should I have heard that I haven't mentioned? Or indeed included in those little montage pictures? Let me know what yours might have been. In the meantime, however, thank you very much for listening. Remember to like the video, hit the subscribe, and ring the bell so that you get those notifications of future videos. Things I've got planned, I'm going to be having done my worst 80s #1 singles, I'm going to do my best 80s #1 singles, and I'll probably do that from other decades too. I've also got my part 2 and 3 of my McCartney rundown in the can, ready to go, and I may well do some more stuff about album artwork. I quite enjoyed making my Iron Maiden Eddie's video, although hardly any of you seem to have watched it. But until the next time, thank you very much for watching Pockenrop, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.